Now, I am going, even though I'm self-moderating, I'm going to be giving a talk today titled The Current Research and Applications for Blueberry Irrigation Scheduling. And this is all being done at the University of Georgia. Some work I've been involved with and some work that some of my colleagues have been involved with. As you heard earlier, I'm Wes Porter, Associate Professor in Extension Precision Ag and Irrigation Specialist. So keep in mind at the end of this talk, I will still be available for live Q&A for anything you may see during the talk. So when we talk about irrigation scheduling, this is data that was pulled from USDA NASS survey in 2018. All it is a technique that involves how much water is needed and when to apply it to the field to meet crop demands. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this slide. I do like producers to really look at it and think about it. The take-home points here, if we look across most southeastern states, we have a very high percentage of people that answered this survey was they irrigate based on visible stress. We have approximately 20 to 30% on average of people that answered they irrigate on feel of the soil. We have overall a pretty low adoption level of soil moisture sensors. I would say in vegetable crops, specialty crops, stuff like that, we have a bigger market for it and a lot faster return on investment. So you should really think about it and consider it. And hopefully after my talk today, you'll think about it a little bit deeper using a more advanced method. I'm going to skip on down and say you see that we have about 15% give or take on a calendar schedule. I think that's how a lot of times when we look at crops like blueberries and some of our other vegetable crops, we end up scheduling irrigation on them is just picking the days per week we're going to run our systems, opening and closing those valves on those days and supplying a need of water at that time. And then if you really get lost, you can just ask your neighbor usually, right? It's just see what he's doing and maybe that'll work for you, but most likely it will not. So I think that's meant as a joke. They just try to see how many people are, just kind of trying to figure it out during the season and don't have a good solid plan. An additional question that was asked from that survey that I like to share is where do farmers get their information from? And so when we look at this, there are only 4 opportunities to answer here. It was University Extension, private consultant, equipment dealer, or an irrigation district. And if we look at a state like Georgia, where I work and where we're at now for the conference, or theoretically virtually for the conference, we see that about 80% of people say they go to the extension service to get their irrigation information. Beyond that, we've got about 40% that go to a private consultant, about 40% that go to an irrigation equipment dealer, and about 13% that use an irrigation district. So you can kind of look through some of these and you might say, well, those total up above 100%. That's true. So all that means is they may talk to a university extension first, and then they go sit down with their consultant and make their final decision, or vice versa somewhere along the way. So they're not exclusive to just one method or one source of information. They can use multiple. So just kind of keep that in mind. You can kind of look across these states I have listed here on where your state may fall. So whereas we don't pay per gallon for irrigation, we do pay the energy to move that irrigation. Most of these numbers are calculated based on pivots, but they're going to be very similar to a drip system. So you can apply them there. The average cost of irrigation is around $9 per acre inch, and that's comprised of a number that's about 60% electric, or $7 per acre inch, and then about 40% diesel, that's at $12.50 per acre inch. So just kind of keep that in mind as we start pumping that water and looking for returns in certain crops, that yes, we don't pay per gallon for that water, but we do pay to move that water from point A or source to site to our field. So keep that in mind. So when we start looking at blueberry water requirements, they require about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of water per week during the growing season. Keep in mind, this is total water. This is rainfall plus irrigation. So we should try to monitor our rainfall just as well as we do our irrigation run times. The time demand for water is highest from the time of fruit expansion until harvest. During the final stages of fruit filling, uniform soil moisture is required because surges in moisture level can cause fruit splitting. So if we get high rainfalls or we accidentally over irrigate during that time, that can really hurt fruit quality. Then research has shown that proper moisture monitoring can reduce water use up to 40% without affecting yield and fruit quality. So just kind of keep that in mind. You have opportunity for returns there. So traditionally, irrigation is scheduled in blueberries based on a timer schedule, just how long are we going to run our drip system. That could range anywhere from 15 or 30 minutes up to 3 hours per zone. We do need to be very careful in most of our sandy soils, especially where we grow blueberries in the southeast, up on beds and the pine bark beds, that we shouldn't run those systems for much longer than 20 minutes, because if we do, what we start seeing is irrigation will infiltrate below the rooting depth. So if we're doing anything else there, especially fertigation or other things, we don't want to be pushing that water below the root zone. So we would say pulsed irrigation is ideal, and especially if we can couple that with an automatic irrigation system. It just means that water will be applied for approximately 15 minutes at a time, shut off, let the plant use some water, let the soil get saturated and equilibriized, and then we run that system again. And so theoretically, we'd apply this multiple times throughout the day or every day during the week. And we'll talk about that a little deeper and look at some data as we get further into this presentation. So unlike many row crops, the unfortunate thing is we've not done as extensive water use curve development work for blueberries, but some of this presentation is going to help address some of that. And you'll see that we've got some scientists here at University of Georgia that have been working to address those issues and provide some tools for you that you can use. So there's two things I'm going to focus on. A lot of this work has been done by Yakos et al., and I've got his contact information at the end of this slide deck. He and I have worked together on some of it, and then he's worked with some other scientists on some of the other parts of it. But basically, he's been targeted at developing more robust smart irrigation scheduling methods for blueberries. The two big methods we're going to talk about today are the Smart Irrigation Scheduling app. You can see that icon in the bottom left. You can find that in your iOS store or Google Play Store, and scheduling utilizing unmanned aerial systems. So smartphone apps for irrigation, they're an interactive ET-based irrigation scheduling tool. They operate on a smartphone platform. Some of you may be familiar with some of them already because there were some vegetable apps already available, and there's some row crop apps already available out there that we've been working on over the past few years. Can be used to implement conventional and precision irrigation, and they cost little to nothing per year, provided that a producer already owns a smartphone. So when we start talking about crop evapotranspiration and how the app works, what we're looking at is what we're losing from the soil surface and the crop itself, and then what we're gaining back through rain and irrigation. So you can just kind of see in these graphics how that works. On a normal day, we evaporate water from the soil surface and we transpire water through those plants. That's where we get the term evapotranspiration. So what's lost there and what needs to be replaced via rain and irrigation? Well, obviously we can't control rain, so we're going to monitor that and then see what we need to supplement with irrigation. That's how the app works. So through the past few years, Dr. Yakos has worked to develop a coefficient curve for blueberries, and this is what runs the backbone of that app. And so you can just kind of see here what it looks like during the entire season, or the entire year, I should say. And so you can kind of look and see when our water use is kind of at peak and when our water use is kind of declined. So that should kind of give you an idea during the season on where we stand and what it looks like on water requirements for this crop. So if you just wanted to see a couple of screenshots just to see what the app looks like, you can set it up. There's a lot of different things you can do with this app. You set up, if we start from the left and work our way to the right, just so you see what's going on here. You look at the row width there, we set those up. You can change that to whatever you need to. You can set up on what days you're typically going to irrigate. You can see in this particular case, we picked Monday, Wednesday, Friday for this particular field. And then what's our water conservation mode? You know, you can make a decision there on where that's at and what you want to use. If we look in the center, you can kind of see a field that was set up. We've got a planting date there, so that just helps us estimate the age of those bushes, so we know where on that coefficient curve to shoot for. We've got an irrigation rate, so you have to determine this based on your zones, your drip size, and all that. You plug that information in, and then the app will tell you, if you're plugging in drip irrigation, the efficiency that's associated with that. And then when we look, we see the irrigation schedule when we've set that up, how long we need to irrigate and how many gallons that will be over that size of field. So you notice that's a 3.4 acre field in this particular case. And then down at the bottom, we see the accumulated rainfall over the previous 7 days. We see we've basically had no rainfall over that time. And then we see the expected evapotranspiration over the next 7 days. So we take historical data and built that in so we can predict what the expected evapotranspiration is to kind of pre-forecast what your irrigation requirements would be. And then you can just kind of see that far right picture what some of the notifications that would come from this app are. You can turn those off if you don't want to look at them, but you can set it up to give these notifications for your fields and farms, so you kind of know what's going on, rain events, how much you need to irrigate, etc. So let's look at some data for a minute. And I think this really, for me, helps bring it back home. So these trials were performed at the research station in Alapahaw, Georgia, so just out of Tifton, on raised pine bark beds. I think at the time we were doing this, the bushes were approximately 3 years old, give or take in there. And so I've got the whole season long graph that you can see there up top, and I've got a little sub snippet there at the bottom. And so if we really want to look at it really close and over kind of a daily basis versus the season long, I think we can suffice to look at season long and talk about what's going on. So this was irrigated with the irrigation scheduling app, the Blueberry app that we just talked about. On your y-axis is soil water tension. And so in this soil type, we really don't want to get that soil water tension much over that 15 to 20 range. And we can kind of see that in that bottom graph. We see where it levels off around that really a 12 to 14 range. We see a level kind of happen. That means the crop is no longer able to extract water out of the soil anymore, or this type of soil media that we're using for these blueberries. But what you'll notice when we look at the season long, you'll see a really good, really rapid wetting, drying the entire year. And yes, there's some times that we exceeded our tension threshold slightly, but I want you to kind of keep this graph in mind, and we're going to look at a few more in just a minute and really see the differences in them. So again, this is using the app. This is using a 10 kilopascal trigger. So what we did is every time on that sensor, our weighted average approached 10 kilopascals, we irrigated. And so you can see some spikes in there, irrigate, spike, irrigate, spike, irrigate. And so we're probably triggering a little more often with this than we did with the app, but that's just because we were reading it from the field exactly. But if you notice, looks like we may irrigate a little more here, and we kept it within that range or a little better than we did with the app. But then I want you to look at this last graph, and these are on Susie Blues, and we're going to look at another variety here in just a minute, the Vernons that we had out there. But this one was where we irrigated 1 inch per week. So independent, if you go back and think about what the app looked like, what the soil moisture sensor looked like, and now we're saying 1 inch per week. What do you really notice is different here? And if we zoom in there in July, we see that we've really pushed out of our threshold, and we did that 2 or 3 times, and we kind of see, especially with that 4-inch sensor, we're just continually drying that out. And so what that tells me, when we're drying that shallow sensor out and we're really drying out our 2 deeper sensors, we're putting that plant in stress. I told you we didn't need to get any higher than about 15 kilopascals on our y-axis. Well, if you notice, when we got into May and we start really putting on fruit, what happened? We kept at or above 15 kilopascals the rest of the season. And so what it was, we were irrigating on like a Monday afternoon, the whole 1 inch that we thought that it required for the week, it would use that relatively rapidly and then push itself into a dry or stress stage by the end of the week before we put that inch on it again. And we just slowly dried that profile out. Whereas with the sensor or with the app, we were irrigating multiple times per week and keeping those bushes in a more optimal soil moisture level. So these were Susie Blues. We can look at Vernons. There's slight variety differences here, type differences. But we look at the app again, you notice how much better this looks. We've just irrigate dry, and we never let the true dry get up above that 15 level. You notice this is, to me, this is like an ideal moisture curve. We're just keeping that plant in an optimal band all the way across. So if we're looking at a 10 kilopascal trigger, very similar, but you see we're triggering probably a little bit more often. We're just pulsing that irrigation a lot more and just keeping micro shots of water out there to it. And if you look at the bottom of the screen, you can really, really see those micro shots multiple times per day happening to that crop. And that's what we recommend. Now, let's look at the 1 inch per week. What's it look like? Again, not so good, especially once we get in that April, May, June time frame and later in the season, we're really putting those berries on and getting towards harvest. We've pushed that plant into stress, and we don't want to do that. So let's really think about, when we start looking at irrigating these crops, adopting an advanced irrigation scheduling method. So I've shown you a couple of methods and talked about them there, and then showed you what our results look like when we're looking at data from graphs. And so kind of keep that in mind when we're looking at it. Currently, the app's cheap to free. Soil moisture sensors do have an associated cost, but we have an opportunity for a big return on those. So from yield, quality, and water conservation. So let's talk about the app, kind of conclusions for it. It predicts the evapotranspiration for the next 7 days, so you can kind of see what's about to happen, provides an irrigation recommendation off of that so that you can pre-plan, so you're not just kind of stuck out there trying to decide what you need to do. You can make a decision a little bit earlier. It's available for download. I told you, so Smart Irrigation is one word. Again, Smart Irrigation and then Blueberry. But if you just type in Smart Irrigation, you'll see all the apps out there. So if you're growing other crops and want to give it a use, then please feel free. You know, in this case, we see that it performed just as well as the soil moisture sensors. So keep that in mind. It just depends on what you're comfortable with, what type of operation you're running, and what you want to put out there. You know, I personally, it's hard to beat soil moisture sensors. There's times that crop models like this app can have some issues and problems if we're not properly tracking rainfall and some other things into the field. But as you see in this case, it performed extremely well. I think it and soil moisture sensors are both very valid irrigation scheduling tools that should be very strongly considered by all the producers in our state. So let's move on. I think this is a little different, probably still on the research edge, but I think it's good for you guys to kind of see what we have coming down the pipeline and what we've been working on. So been doing a trial at Alma, Georgia, to kind of fact check it, I would say, like I just was talking about with soil moisture sensors. We can't really do any better than having something physically in the field. Had 16 sensors where you see those red stars down in the field. It is drip irrigation, and we had 2 irrigation treatments here. So you can look at it. And what we did really is we just used the unmanned aerial system to record canopy properties to see, can we see differences in these crops, and could we eventually start using that to schedule irrigation? So the first flights that we did were here with a thermal camera. That's a FLIR View Pro that was used. That camera, let's just say, ranges around $4,000. You see, if you look at it in the picture, very similarly shaped as a GoPro camera. Can be integrated to a UAV, but you got to make sure that it does come with an integration kit with whatever UAV you have, and that it can be done. You need to really do your homework on that. Just don't go buy one and think you can just hook it to any UAV and be ready to roll. There's a little bit of work that needs to go into that. And there's also work that has to go into processing some of this data. We can kind of look here at the variations across the field. So this is in Fahrenheit. The blues are in the range of 80 to 102, that lighter blue, kind of 103 to 106, the yellow around the 110, 115 range, and the red is get much 115 and higher. So you can see the edges. We didn't have a lot of red in the field, soils mainly. That's the soil reflecting back is what you see there, not really bushes. So wherever bare soil, we usually saw much warmer temperatures. And then you can kind of just see some natural variations throughout that field. We see that it looks like the farmer method in this case, we kept it a lot cooler on average. And, you know, does it being that much cooler necessarily translate directly to yield savings? Maybe, maybe not, but we do see some definitive differences here in those 2 methods. All right, another thing that we've looked at is looking at NDVI. And so we've used a parrot sequoia here. And you can see we don't see as much difference in NDVI. Really, when I look at this, I see the soil stand out in red pretty easily. That's what that background is. But mostly where it looks like we're falling in that upper 0.8 to 0.9 range. And that can happen. NDVI can get saturated when crops are mature, older, etc. So, you know, don't get discouraged sometimes on some of the stuff we're looking at. Maybe NDVI is not the best thing for irrigation scheduling, or maybe there's a niche market or niche time of the year that we need to look at it. So that parrot sequoia costs about $3,500. Again, if you've got a unmanned aerial system and you're looking at one of these, make sure that there's an integration kit that's available for the particular UAS that you own for this camera. All right, and the last thing I'm going to talk about, it's kind of interesting, is you can get free NDVI imagery pretty rapidly from a lot of sources now. You know, like a website, for example, is CropSat. There's a couple of scouting apps that are available for smartphones. You can just draw your boundary around the field and it'll download NDVI whenever the satellite was able to get it. I will go ahead and warn you, if you look at some of this, in a lot of cases, you may have days that you don't get it because it's too cloudy. You know, if you think about the Southeast and what our summers look like, we have a lot of rainfall and we'll have a lot of cloud cover sometimes. So if you're looking at free imagery, don't bank on getting it every few days or every week. You know, it's a reality check. Really, you know, it's quick, easy, free. You can just kind of see what your plant health look like over the season. Like now you can go on the scouting apps, draw that field boundary and download whatever was available for the past year, year and a half, and kind of do some checking. And that might help you change some management strategies for the future. But it is a tool that's out there and available. I just want to make you aware of it. So the one thing you want to keep in mind, very low spatial resolution. Just keep that in mind. It's 10 meter. So you can see how blocky this image is here. So unlike with the UAVs, we're getting point data. We're getting really high resolution data there. So again, maybe not making hardline decisions, but just kind of looking at trends and stuff that's happening in your field and some areas you may want to address when we're using some of this. So kind of keep that in mind. So we see that thermal images can be a useful tool to quickly detect some problems in the field, and it looks like that they can be related to irrigation in this case. And a lot of times that's the closed stomata, which is water stress. That's when we see plant wilting starting to happen, and it causes higher canopy temperatures. So when that stomata closes, we're not evapotranspirating as fast, and the plant temperatures are going to get warmer. So NDVI images can successfully present the vigor, perhaps, of the blueberries. May not be as good as the thermal for doing irrigation scheduling or doing some detections there. I guarantee you would see if you had some zones that were not applying the proper amount of water or had stopped up areas or something like that. You would realize that very quickly with NDVI. And here they could be used to compare the effect of different irrigation treatments on blueberries. We kind of saw that Blueberry app did, in fact, when we looked at it, have a little bit higher NDVI values than the farmer's treatment in this particular case, which theoretically means that it should have been a little bit healthier of a plant. So here's the thing, is to know how to use the software, equipment, and all this stuff. So, drones are fun. UAVs are fun. They are a tool. They can be pretty complicated at times. So don't go in it thinking they're just ready to roll and very easy and good to set up. They can be aggravating and complicated. So just kind of keep that in mind. Thank you for your attention. I do want to remind you that you can put your questions, during it in the live Q&A box, and going to be available immediately after this right here for live Q&A if you've got any questions about anything we did. And here's the contact information, mine up top there, and Bill Yakos right here. So if anything specific to the research, feel free to reach out to him, or I can get you in contact with him. But again, appreciate your attention this afternoon and look forward to interacting with you in just a few minutes. Thank you. All right, thank you. And today a little bit different. I'm kind of self-moderating. I see some of you already joined, so I appreciate that. If you got any questions, make sure you type those into the questions box below, or you can send them through the audience chat box. Either way, whichever you're most comfortable with, you can do it either way. But I want to remind you, if you're getting pesticide credits, that just like a lot of you've already done, make sure that you type your name and the states that you want to get the credits for in the box, sign in, put your name and all that in, and make sure you sign out by the end. We just need to make sure we got a record of you signing in, signing out, doing all that. So with that, it looks like some of you guys are already starting to do it. If you don't mind, I'm going to sit here and wait to get any questions from you. So I'll give you a few minutes, and I'll see if we get any coming in. And if we do, I'll make sure I get those answered. So make sure you send them in if you've got them. Walker, I apologize. I see that. You said you missed 70% of the talk because it was loading. I'm not sure. Not sure on that end that's completely out of my area of expertise. I don't know how to fix that. I If I had any, I don't know if there's anything I can help you with from, like I said, with talk not loading. Maybe after it's been not live on air, you can go back and try to rewatch it. If I follow you right, you're probably from the if you're from the Happy Berry, I would assume that's the one in right there at Pickens Oconee County line. I've been out there before. I actually worked with your wife for a little while. If it's the right farm at Clemson at the Poultry Science Center there. So feel free to reach out to me if you get to go back and watch this and got any questions about it. I know you had some blueberry bushes there. Anything we can help with, for sure, reach out to us and I can see what I can do. All right, so we got a question here: is what type of sensors do you recommend for small hobby growers? So that's a really good question. What I would say, you don't want to jump in too deep with any of it. There's a lot of, but you also don't want to waste your money. There's a lot of cheap sensors out there on the market. I'm going to be honest. What I would look for is kind of cheap, reliable, something that you can go out there and check is probably a watermark sensor. We use a lot of those with our blueberry trials. You can get those sensors for about $30 to $40 each, and you can install them. What you do need with them is a hand reader. If you're not quite ready to go that far, I'd tell you to look at a tensiometer. So I don't know if you're familiar with that. You fill it with water. Make sure you soak it in water the evening before, and then put it out in your field. You got to check it, every few days, and make sure that see where your soil water tension's at. And depending on what crop you're looking at, I know this is the blueberry irrigation scheduling, and what the condition of that bed is, that's where we would set that trigger threshold. In my talk, you probably saw that we're in a pine bark bed here in Georgia, sandy. And so we keep that threshold at 15 kilopascals or below. So again, the watermark sensor is pretty good. You can get the sensor itself for about 30 to 40 bucks. It's got 2 wires on it. The reader's a little more expensive. The reader's about $300. But what you do is you clip that reader on to the sensor itself. You take an instantaneous reading. And what I would do if you go that route, Dan, is I would make sure I took readings every few days at least. If you can get them every day, that'd be great. If you can't get them every day, take some readings, write them down in a notebook somewhere. If you're familiar with Excel, graph them in Excel. But if you can, kind of get an idea of what your soil moisture is doing over time, then you can really start determining when to turn that system on and off. Of course, that's going to change with how much rainfall we're getting, how hot it is, especially when you're in peak demand. You're really doing fruit loading, bloom, all that on those bushes. So keep all of that in mind at that time too. So that's where I'd start. If you Google search cheap soil moisture sensors, you're going to get a wide gamut of stuff out there. Be careful though with all that stuff. Some of it could just be junk. So just want to make sure that you get something that you really need and you can really use. Hey, so another question. Dan, if I didn't fully answer yours, please ask me a little bit deeper, reach out to me. But like I said, I recommend watermark sensors there. Here, I see the Smart Irrigation, what looks like weather stations in Georgia and Florida. So you just downloaded it, and that's what's there. So the reason is, I'll go a little deeper into that's the Smart Irrigation apps that we've developed for blueberries, and we have them for a lot of other crops. We have really thorough weather networks in Georgia and Florida, and we've got agreements with the programmer to integrate those stations. If you, Alan, I see you're from North Carolina State. If you could reach out to me, we could see if we could get some North Carolina stations integrated. But here's how it works. It actually should be applicable across all states in the U.S. And here's why. We've worked with Dark Sky to get radar predictive rainfall. And so you should be able to select that option. So you don't need a weather station. And it brings in, I think it's approximately 15-kilometer evapotranspiration data, which is definitely a high enough resolution. And it brings in right at 1 to 2 kilometer radar predictive rainfall. So you get both of those when you select that regional radar predictive rainfall feature in there, and don't tie it to a specific weather station. So we'd just build it off of weather stations to start with in Georgia and Florida because of a grant we had, and then we found out even here, even though we got high density networks of weather stations, that we may sometimes miss rainfall events, or rain's different, of course, right? You know, if we're even 5 miles away, even across the road, sometimes those events are different. What's not really different is evapotranspiration numbers. But I would encourage you, download it and try to use the more regionalized feature in it. And if you got any questions about it, feel free to reach out. But it is a very good tool. And we utilize, I don't know if you looked at my talk, we compared it back to sensors, and it did just as well as sensors when using that app. So, you know, that's a cheap way to go about it, to really get some irrigation scheduling in there on those bushes without having to do any investment except your smartphone. So, very good question. Thanks for the good question, guys. We'll be on a couple more minutes if y'all got any more. If not, like I said, if you look into some of this stuff and got some after, for sure, feel free to reach out. All right, we got another question down there. Walker got it in. Sensors at 6, 12, 18, 24 inches. Mine, 4, 8, 12. You're a soil clay. The soil is a clay loam with 8% organic matter. No, you're not wrong. I'm going to tell you why we selected what we did and why ours are where they're at. So a couple things, and I'm for sure willing to discuss this a little bit deeper around with anybody that wants to talk about sensor depths. We put a shallow sensor first because we've noticed even in our soil types, and we're kind of a sandy loam. If we put a sensor much deeper than that, any of our smaller rainfall events, or in this case, we're doing drip irrigation, but if we're doing any overhead irrigation, we got lighter events, that 1/3 of an inch, maybe 1/2 inch or less. We don't really even see those events with those deeper sensors. So we like that one shallower sensor. That 6-inch sensor should capture those just fine for you, Walker. The next one, that 8, that I would compare that 8 to 6-inch sensor pretty close. So that one's kind of where we're starting to get a meat of our roots. Most of our roots are right in that area, and that's really where we do a lot of our irrigation scheduling now. We can get irrigation down to that 6 to 8-inch depth on overhead systems. I don't know how you're irrigating. If you're on a drip system, we can, of course, push it a little bit deeper by pulsing that system, running a little bit longer, stuff like that. But if we're on overhead, sometimes the infiltration rates, as we get into heavier soils like you've got with that clay loam, it gets hard to push that in, and we get, like you get, like I said, I'm very familiar with your area. I grew up very close to your farm. We get those heavy rainstorms that come off the lakes in the summertime. That real fast, hard rain will run off a lot of times, and so we'll miss a lot of those events. And so, again, we're doing irrigation. I kind of like that middle sensor because we can get infiltration down to it as long as we put it on with a low enough rate. And then the 12-inch sensor helps us too. We've got roots down there, and we see a lot going on. The one thing that I don't put a lot of that 24-inch, 18's about as deep as we can go. That 24-inch sensor, most soils we cannot really affect very well that deep with irrigation, whether it's drip or not. And also, I think we struggle to get roots down that deep sometimes, and we're trying to do some other operations. And so we just a lot of times don't put a sensor that deep. I do on corn and some other crops. If you see water use down that deep, you see responses from your irrigation, hey, that's great. I say that's a really great thing. That sensor's doing exactly what it's supposed to. If you notice that 24-inch sensor just never really moves at all, it doesn't re-wet, doesn't dry, nothing else is going on, then I would just, if you go to put more sensors in, I don't know if I'd spend the money to have those 4 depths. That's kind of where it comes back from my perspective. I don't know if that helps you or not. Hopefully it does. Yeah. So drip irrigation, you can probably push that a little bit deeper and manage that a little bit better than some overhead. So, like I said, as long as you're seeing response from those sensors, by all means, keep it up. As long as you see response of your irrigation, one, and see response of the plant using moisture at those deeper depths, do it. Here's the other thing I would say. You do any fertigation at all, I think it's pretty critical to have a deeper sensor down there. And if you never see any water withdrawal by the plant or water usage by the plant at that sensor, make sure you're not pushing moisture down that deep, because at that point, that means you're not using any water down there. Don't push your fertilizer down that deep. That makes sense to everyone. So, if you've got a deeper sensor, the good thing about it is you can monitor. If you're not using water, you can monitor to make sure you're not keeping it just too wet down there, losing fertilizer, pushing water down due to percolation, anything like that. So that's another benefit of that deeper sensor there. So, no, again, I'm going back. You're not wrong. I think you're right on target. It's just all soils are a little bit different, and we just kind of have to react and do, where we're at on the type of sensors we're using, the type of irrigation, and everything else. Very good question. I'll be on for a few more minutes. Anybody has any other questions? I'm monitoring everything. It's a good conversation. I greatly appreciate y'all asking. Yep, we got a comment and a question. It says soil is a tank, water stored 10 or so feet, and water's moving up from below. Potentially. So the difference that you have, Walker, than what we have in our soil types is you do in that more clay soil type, you can get some of the vertical movement of water up. Our sandy soils, we never get vertical movement. So once it goes down, once it starts to go down, then we kind of lose it. We don't get any vertical movement. Now, if you see vertical movement back up, like as you dry that out, you can see on your sensors you're having vertical movement back up. Hey, that's good. The soil that you have is a heavier red clay soil up in that region of South Carolina, and so you probably do get some of that, and you can make utilization of that. So that's not wrong at all. A lot of times we put these blueberries on beds in this sandy or pine bark soil, though. Once we irrigate them, if it's been dry, that water just kind of percolates out. So again, it's a function of soil type. So no, you're dead on there. We've got, I think, I've been given my 2-minute warning, give or take. Well, we got about a minute or two left before we need to start wrapping up. So I'm still here. I'm not kicking anybody out, but if you got anything, make sure you get it in. There is a soil type question about, does the app account for some of that? I know we're about to wrap up. I got the approval that I've got time for this one last question. Yes, the app accounts for soil type. I don't think it actually accounts for vertical movement of water up, but it accounts for soil water storage. So it's embedded in that. So as we go to a heavier soil, we of course store more water in that soil. So it accounts for it from that perspective. Yes. I know we're starting to run out of time, and we'll throw this more pitch out here. I've really enjoyed the questions. So if any of y'all have more questions after this, I think my email was at the end of that presentation. For sure, feel free to email me. I'm pretty easy to find. My name and UGA to reach out. I'll help all that I can with any questions you may have around this topic. So before we have to close this down for the time's sake, I just wanted to throw that out there. So with that, I'm supposed to tell y'all one more quick reminder. You know, in the chat box, make sure you sign out. I think most of y'all have, and these will be these presentations will be available until April 30th, along with the virtual trade show. So keep that in mind too. You can watch them. You can reach out to like myself, the author, ask any questions after that point to us. So I think we're closing it out. I appreciate it. Thanks everyone for joining today.